Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to another great episode of We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only place where you come to learn how to take apartment buildings and turn them into amazing communities. I am your host, John Brackett. I have another great guest, actually an alumni of the We Build Great Apartment Communities podcast, someone who has been brought back by popular demand, Scott Choppin. Welcome, man.
Hey, John, great to be here, man. Glad to be back.
Very great to have you, bud.
Thank you for the invite back. How about that?
Well, you know what? You're back by popular demand, and we got so many different requests around the conversation that I had with you and so much curiosity around your product. I'm sure you had a lot of folks reach out to you. But because of the unique market that we're in right now, and of course, some of what you're doing in high density markets with the very specialized product that you build out, I think just another great conversation, right? Because there's just a lot of curiosity around that. I know you've been very successful at moving these developments forward in this market, right? And so now it's December 2020, and you're still finding opportunity and creating developments forward. And you and I, of course,
we're still alive, John.
Still alive, man. And you and I, of course, are talking about some ventures as well. So, okay, with that being said, I think a great place to start, Scott, is your background. Because some people already know who you are, some don't. So if you can start with your background, your story, and then what we'll do is we'll transition into the product type, okay, that you're doing now. Right, that you've. I want to use the word coined. Is that a good word?
I say innovated, but coined is good.
Innovated. There we go.
Right.
That you've innovated. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then let's talk through some examples, man, so that our audience can make some of this tangible. Right, with some recent developments and some of the lease up that you're doing right now, and then we'll get into some of the socioeconomics around this product type, which is why I think there's a for sure a space for this. A place for this in pretty much in any cycle, right? So please share your background, Scott, your story, man.
Yeah, thank you. So I formed Urban Pacific 20 years ago this year. So March of 2000, formed the company. Basically, I have a family background in real estate development. So my Uncle Mike and my dad Kerry were both developers in their own right. Which gave me sort of the background of understanding of like, what does a real estate developer do? Because, that's not your standard career choice. You don't see the book in the library of how to be a real estate developer, at least not yet. So, got out of college and ended up working in the construction trades for a couple of years. Got, built some background about what that was all about, determined that wasn't going to be what I wanted to be my career choice. And because I had this background in real estate for my family, and, I sort of just like I'm always constantly educating myself, several, books prompted me to start thinking about, how deal making was done, right? Like, investment books and, things that prompted me to sort of understand like what as you and I talked before we started this, deal making, how do you find them? What do you do with them? How do you create value, enhance value? And so between, sort of like, working in the construction trades, family background, plus this, my, self-education, it finally dawned on me, I'm going to be a real estate developer. And then it became really just, my planning for the rest of my education, getting a college degree, finance degree. And then, I chose to go work for others for several years in the development industry because like, it's such a complicated, obscure business of how to be a real estate developer, things like
parts,
political process. And, those things are not, you can't learn them in school. I mean, there's just no way. And so I did that. And then I ended up working for several companies, getting really just a killer crash course in how to be a real estate developer. And I had really good people that I worked with that were, after teaching me and others who were in my position in order to make us more effective to help them, but also we got, the education out of it. So spent some time doing that and then launched Urban Pacific in 2000 really to pursue what we call urban infill, which is taking existing lots inside the city, inside neighborhoods, existing urban fabric, and either underutilized or vacant, and creating new, housing and residential projects inside those infill neighborhoods.
Okay, awesome, man. I really appreciate the summary. Now, I remembered our first conversation, and you kind of alluded to that in this conversation as well, or your comments earlier, that you had some pretty good mentors when you started off in the development space, right? Yep. And so your comment around this space being fairly obscure, right, as a developer, because there's just a lot to consider, a lot of moving parts, right? You have to deal with the economics, the social economics, the political landscape, right? You have to deal with contractors. There's some good moving parts, but because of the complexity, that also equates to margin and more opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. And so what was maybe the one or two biggest takeaways that you learned from watching your mentors make all of those pieces work together?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, several answers. I think so. I worked when I was at Kaufman & Broad, which was my first, professional job in the real estate development industry. I worked for a guy ran that group, Mike Costa, but I worked for a guy named Mo Mohana. I worked for another guy, but Mo and I sort of worked, side by side. And the key is we commuted to West LA from Long Beach every day. He lived in Cypress. I lived in Long Beach, and we'd commute because the commute was like crazy, right? Hour and a half on average each way, twice a day. And I didn't intend this, but what was interesting is Mo is just like the kind of guy, if anybody's ever met him, was just happy to talk about the business, loved what he was doing, was a project manager, had very skilled, had several years of really deep experience. And I got the great luxury of having this guy camped out in a car with me, go 3 hours a day.
Oh, that's great.
Where we could just talk about the business. I could ask him questions.
Sure.
And then it morphed into this thing where we talk about something. I go, hey, Mo, I'm working on this thing, and I got this, city council member, and they're really hard, tough to deal with, and I got to get my project done, or, and so he'd go, okay, we'll do this. And, so we'd sort of, in fact, his saying was, you got to go under the wall, through the wall, over the wall, around the wall. But, your job as a project manager is you got to get, to the other side. And I would have this great luxury of sort of, he'd prep me or coach me on what to do. I'd go to work, I'd do that thing. It would work, it would fail, it would halfway succeed or whatever. And then I'd write back and I go, hey, Mo, I did this thing you told me to, and it didn't work. And he said this thing, and and he'd go, okay, now we do this other thing. So I think to answer your question generally is, in a mentorship structure, or if you're working for somebody else, the idea of having the capability to sort of like real time assess issues and processes and hurdles, right, and breakdowns that you have, and then having somebody who can work with real time to resolve those and watch how it goes, right? Because as you said, that it's so complex that you can't have a rule that says, when A happens, do B. I mean, sometimes you can if it's, certain parts of the business, but particularly when you get into like zoning and politics and neighborhood and, or working with capital sources, as you and I know, working with every equity investor has a different methodology. They have a different concern, different things that they're worried about, different goals, objectives that you can't know. So it's really learning, I guess the answer is a fundamental process of how the deals go, right? Meaning what's the process and progress of a project? You acquire land, and then you do your due diligence, then you design, then you do CDs, et cetera. And knowing that so well that you then start to get creative inside that process. In other words, like think of like a musician who's like, the maestro, right? They know it so well that they have such a deep and thorough understanding of the fundamentals that it gives them now the freedom to go like innovate and create and dance, if you will, with the process, because it's not a process that you can apply like just a rote set of, memorized things. And not that people think that, but it's so complicated and there's so many interweaving variables that you have to be able to go, oh, fit this way. Oh, no, fit this way. Oh, I got stuck. I better change it.
Right.
And in fact, I'll finish with this. I as I teach people, like, we have interns and stuff like that work with us. I talk about the real estate development as a framework of knowledge. And there's all these little pieces that all interweave in a web that make up the total framework of development. And I came up with this because when you first go to work for somebody or you start to mentor with somebody, you're going to get that project and you go, oh, hey, go work on this project, Scott. But it's the tail end. Oh, construction finishes. Now we're leasing up. Well, you got to learn that part. But then you won't know that until you go through the cycle on another project to reuse that part again. So I call it filling in the framework. Each part, each module, or however you think of it, needs to be learned thoroughly. Because as a project manager and a learner, you're never going to have the luxury of starting the very beginning of a project, going to the very end of a project. You'll always be disrupted. Somebody brought you a deal, John, you go, oh, it's already designed. I got to be able to assess the design and underwrite it. I didn't do the design or whatever, right? The situation is, and then ultimately you fill in that framework of knowledge. And then you can start to use that most powerfully in your own work or, in teams or partnerships that you work in.
Okay, awesome, man. I like the analogy. So if you had to point to one thing that you felt your mentor or that person gave you as a takeaway for being successful in what you do today, what would that be?
I think I would go back to the example I used with that guy, Mo, is that, like, as a project manager or ultimately as a developer, you are responsible for getting that thing done or executing or completing, that no one else, and particularly when you're an entrepreneur in real estate, which you know yourself, like, there's nobody who's going to be as conscientious and driven or like tenacious as you will be. And not every project manager is that way. I happen to be. You're probably the same way yourself. Mo was. But it's basically, manage the project like you own it. Or when we get to our level, you actually own it. And I have people who work for me as project managers, and I have to teach them. I go, look, you need to come to the project like this thing lives or dies because of you. I'll help you. In our company, I'm ultimately responsible as the guarantor of the loan and all the fun stuff that goes along with that. But it's interesting, once you start to turn that corner of, I own this thing. And when I was a project manager, man, if my deals didn't go well, I suffered. If they went well, I was happy. If I was getting beat up, like, I took it like personally, like, this is my thing to make happen. And yes, I need to ask for help. And, maybe I wasn't financing them, but I looked at it like, if this thing doesn't get done, it was because of me. And maybe it's a philosophy of personal responsibility or whatever you call it, but it's that personal ownership of the project, and then doing whatever it takes. And I mean ethically, right? I don't mean anything that's, not correct.
I know what you mean, man. I know what you mean.
But, Mo's idea, like, I really, run through the wall, around the wall, over the wall, dig under it, whatever, get your friend to push you over. I mean,
just get to the finish line, right?
Well, just whatever it takes to get it done. And that is finish line. I agree with that analogy.
Yeah.
Because I think particularly if I look at, depending on, where people are from, what their educational background is, I think culturally in the United States, I think we have a lot of people that are not, younger generations who are not necessarily oriented around a philosophy of total personal responsibility. Like, if things fail, probably it's you. Or me, or you.
Usually it's not probably, man. It's usually 100%.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And
no matter how you want to point blame at people, right?
Well, right. It's like, not to get, political, but, we're in an environment where people want free stuff, and, they got the debt in college, but they don't want to have to pay it off. And I get it, man. And people are doing the best they can. But my house with my kids and my family and my wife, I'm like, look, if it's going to get done, you got to do it. I mean, This is my two older boys. This is like, we meet weekly, sort of strategic knowledge and teaching, some of the stuff that you and I have talked about. And I'm really after that. Like, look, ultimately you guys have to do it. And, I said, look, guys, I'm sorry, but no one gives a shit about you. And it's harsh, and no one wants to hear it.
So funny that
no one is coming to save you.
Yeah. No,
you got to do it. That. I will help you. In fact, that's my philosophy in my, 53 this year for the rest of my life, basically, is to, build this company, build the portfolio of these workforce housing units, and teach my kids how to launch themselves and help them launch successfully. But one of them is realities operations. Like, the market doesn't care if you're right or wrong. The market is the market. You are responsible for making it happen or not. No one's coming to save you. And it's not an easy conversation, but it's a real conversation.
Yeah. And it's an important one, right? It's funny. The conversation that my dad had with me, he said, hey, life ain't fair, man, and people are rotten. And then he said, look, I'm telling you this so that when it happens to you, you're not surprised. You just move through it, right?
That's right.
You just move through it. And when he told me that, I think I was I was either a sophomore or a junior in high school. I got into some trouble, right? And he had a conversation with me.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it wasn't repetitive, but he did have that conversation, and I never forgot that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very true, right? But what I took away from that was how we positioned his last comment, right? Which was, hey, the reason why I'm telling you this is so that when you run into this, it's just not a shocker to you.
Yeah.
And you don't get paralyzed, and you understand how to move through it. And how often, Scott, and have you seen this, right? Where people run into a challenge, and hands go up, right? And that's it. Inside of the world that you operate in, okay, there are challenges all the time, right? There are challenges all the time. There are barriers all the time. And sometimes it's even your willingness to just work through whatever it is, whatever that obstacle is, right?
Yeah.
And get through that. So how do you lead your team through that space? Because inside of this world, inside of this business, rather, things aren't perfect, right? You can build process, you can build systems, and you can take out a lot of the inefficiencies, but it's just not a perfect business, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you have to have strong leadership. So how do you lead your teams through that?
Well, there's a few different ways, so I'll try to give it in a like a relatively succinct manner. I think first I always work with project managers and prepare them in the way that we talked about, which is, look, you're going to run into a continuous set of challenges. As a young project manager, you got to learn. I will work with you. Our teams will work with you to teach you. And I say don't. So first is to be in recognition that you have a problem, John, right? Like, that's a lot. I mean, the hands go up. That's even admitting that you have a problem. A lot of people, they just don't even know they have a problem, right? Like, I call it a cognitive blind spot. They don't know what they don't know. Right. And so the first thing to do is go, hey, you got to just at least be looking around and notice. In fact, I have a saying at the company. I go, look, bring me all your problems. I mean, I don't want, I'm like anybody else. I don't want to be swimming in problems. But what I tell them is, I say this, John, check this out. I go, look, I'm a great problem solver, but I cannot solve problems I don't know about. Yeah. I can't do it. Yeah. And that's usually for my project managers. I say, look, arguably you're going to run into lots of different scenarios of stuff that you haven't seen, don't know how to deal with. And your first inclination is maybe just to ignore it or, hope it goes away. Gosh, this will, and I go, don't do that. It won't work. And I don't want to have to deal with lots of problems. I will teach you how to deal, but you got to bring with me first. And I said, second thing is to, notice them. And then third is to work with your teams, your networks, your JV partners, whoever is in your networks to solve the problems. Because the philosophy I tell people is two heads are always going to be better than one.
For sure.
And I also tell my project managers, I said, hey, look, when you bring them to me, in addition to the other people on the team, there's probably not a problem that you're going to come across that I haven't already solved. And I'm not sitting here, oh, I'm great, I'm going to do everything. I don't want to do that. Like I actually need to be having conversations with guys like yourself and raising capital and producing new deals. So I can't be swimming in problems. But I go, don't try to do it. Don't be a Lone Ranger. Don't be, like in America, we have this, John Wayne, I, went to the top of the hill, lone machine gunner, and I wiped the entire enemy force. I go,
I went to the top of the hill with my machine gun and I came back down with the same problem.
Yeah, well, or I got shot on the top of the hill, whatever. But that's movies, that's TV, and in our culture, that like in America, like we have this, maverick Lone Ranger, but that's really a weak configuration. And in fact, if anything, I've learned from my own learning in the last, let's say, 10 or 15 years, is really the more powerful my networks, the better I'm going to do. Now I need to be a valuable offer in return to those networks. It's a two-way street, right? Transactional and reciprocal. But now instead of like, I used to go, oh, I got this problem, I'm going to figure it out myself. I'll go study, I'll read this, that. Now I don't do that. I go, oh, I got this problem. Who do I know? Who's better at this than me?
That's huge.
And I got to pay them or, help them in return or whatever. Now it's like I've been training for the last, 8 or 10 years to go first to like, who do I know who's really good at this? Who's the best? Who can I find? Who can I go hire or transact with so that they can come help me? And one, you resolve the problem much more quickly. But then, me as the CEO and a manager and a person, I'm much more at peace than trying to figure it out and you're winging it, right? And you don't know and you're not like seasoned in whatever that domain is. That's a way better way to be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, man, I really appreciate that, Scott. So let's talk about your product, right? So you have this product that you've innovated and you're building this thing out, having success doing it, leasing it up, doing it in this market, in the market prior. And so you've learned a lot along the way, right? Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about what you have innovated, and then we'll get into some examples of how this has worked. When I say this, meaning how this product has met a need inside of this space.
Yeah.
Or inside of this market, rather.
Yeah. So, for everybody who's listening, the product that John's referencing is called Urban Townhouse, or UTH for short. And basically that is the way we describe that is it's pairing private capital with a workforce housing rental model. Okay. So what does that mean? We're building a 3-story townhouse, build to rent product. So a townhouse typically would be a for sale product. In California, you got attached like a condo product, but we build it to rent, and we build a very specific product type with 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms in this 3-story townhouse. John and I were talking earlier, all our units come with a 2-car direct access garage. All units have a ground floor bedroom bathroom for in-laws or grandparents who might live with the family. But the intention of this unit is to serve really 2 marketplaces. One is the large urban working class family. Think like a Hispanic family where it's mom and dad and maybe an adult child or in-law, grandparents. And culturally and historically, they've lived multi-generationally, right? But we don't have in California a product type other than houses for rent that traditionally would serve these family groups appropriately, like where they can live multi-generationally under one rooftop. They might have to live in 2 units or, adjacent or down the block or whatever. We give them 1 unit to live in. And the other one that I was telling John about earlier is that in the pandemic, we're in December of 2020. We're several months into this. What we're starting to see is an acceleration in roommate groups that are professional working folks who have had their companies have gone virtual, and now they're starting to collect in groups of friends that want to live together because they like to socialize and take care of each other, but they don't have to then be locked down to their job in one city or another region. So now they can leave their work locations and come together into our unit. We're seeing this like in one of our Orange County projects where it's 3 professionals that have all lived in different places in the state of California. Their jobs went virtual and they go, hey, cool, right? I can go live with my buddies. And now we're going to go rent a unit. And they go, oh, we're going to live in Fullerton, where, by the way, none of them have a job. They're not from there. Maybe there's some past history. But they go, cool, your 5-bedroom unit is cool because I'm going to have 3 bedrooms occupied by people. And then the 2 extra bedrooms they're using as home office, work from home situation, right? So they're actually carrying the load, their full load of the rent on 3 people, where families usually will have, 2 to 4 wage earners in the household that they then share. But I think the key to think about, John, is all these groups are living an economic sharing lifestyle, right? They're sharing income and expenses across a larger group of people. With family, it would be family members. With roommates, it's other people. Co-living is one model of this. We don't describe ourselves as co-living, but it is an economic sharing lifestyle. And that's important for 2 reasons. One is, in a peak market like we were in December of 2019 and January, we had very high cost market, all right, with stagnant or non-growth middle incomes. Well, the only way for them to afford better housing is to combine together their incomes, right? And then what happens in the pandemic or a recession is people may be underemployed or maybe they're unemployed. And so the natural inclination is them to recombine together in roommates or families to share their incomes and expenses in a down market, right? So this is the interesting thing about our product. It performs in both markets well. Now, we didn't know UTH is 4 years old. We didn't know exactly how it would perform in a recession, but we anticipated from surveys that were done in the last recession that we knew and know that families will recombine and roommates will join together, and they'll move out of that, 1 bedroom where they have a single earner in a 1 bedroom. They lose their job. They're going to move out, or they're trying to save costs. And so they'll move out of the single unit into a larger unit where they can then share together. And that's probably one of the most unique characteristics of our product type. End result, as we spoke about before, is that we're actually seeing a dramatic acceleration in our business plan in 2020, in the middle of arguably the worst recession that you and I have ever seen. I used to say that about 2008, but I can't say that. It's not. Now we're setting a new record.
Isn't that scary? Said that in 2008. Now you're saying it in 2020.
I used to say,
rates keep going like this.
I used to say 2008 was the worst recession we'll see in our lifetime, and I'm not happy to be wrong or right about that, but the reality. But what I will say is 2020 is not a real estate-led recession, at least in housing, right? Where in 2008, the for sale market just got decimated. Obviously, CDO and the mortgage product that, blew that market up into a huge bubble. That really caused a lot of for sale projects and residential generally to suffer. Although if you look at statistically through 2008 to 2010 in Southern California, at least the market I've studied, multifamily rents were relatively stable. They weren't growing. They were flat, but they weren't going down. And, this is macro, right? Like,
right.
But that was one of the reasons that informed us that this UTH model was going to be defensive in a downturn, because we go, look, if people are moving out of for sale or they're moving into larger units for some economic reason, and that they can be more successful by combining incomes and expenses, then we can anticipate in any future downturn that would happen again. And that's exactly.
So man, here's what I like about what you're saying, right? Because one of the things that's really difficult to do, and I try to do this, is you have to try to break your traditional way of thinking in order to find new opportunity, right? Greater possibility. So one of the reasons why, man, I love talking to you and people like you that are constantly innovating is it forces me, and hopefully a lot of other people out there, to break your traditional way of thinking, or in this case, my traditional way of thinking about housing, right? Because the problem that you're meeting, or that you're solving rather, is a shift in socioeconomics, right? Mm-hmm. You're just solving a demographic shift, and you're creating, in this case, a product to allow you to do that a little bit more effectively, but it's a housing product, right? But, it's really interesting, man, is if you don't intentionally engage in different ways of thinking, you're always thinking the same way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, thinking the same way doesn't expose you to greater possibility, right? So, was it Einstein that said, if you keep trying to approach the same problem with the same level of thinking, you're left with the same problem.
Yeah.
And so it's always great, man, to look at opportunity from different vantage points. Not that it's right or wrong. It's just a different way to view opportunity. But here's what I do know, that the more you condition your brain to see things differently, the more opportunity and possibility you see, right? Because you're not following down the traditional path of looking at things. And I think that's one of the reasons, we've been able to evolve, is simply by being able to have conversations with folks like you and many other people out there and find different patterns of thinking, right? Different ways of thinking that we can then use to also evolve our businesses as well. So I love that, man. Please.
So the idea, let me just make a comment on that. So the idea of two heads are better than one, that's right. What you just said that's where that lives. In other words, we learn these new things, or we get different ideas by talking to other people. Now, maybe that's reading books or listening to podcasts or watching YouTube videos. But if you think about it fundamentally, it's always going to be other human beings that produce this for you. And you only get that when you interact with those other human beings, right? If you think about yourself as a person, you're like a submarine, right? Like you're enclosed. Yes, you have eyes and ears that are the hatches to the submarine. But if you're in your normal operational stance, you're all closed up and you're underwater and you're like your own, vessel. And so the way that you expand your knowledge, we talked about learning, the way you learn to innovate and actually do innovation is by, connecting with other people. In fact, there's a terminology, it's called Co-Autogenic structural coupling. And and everybody knows this, like it's a fancy term, but everybody knows this. It's like when you hang around with your friends and they have a slang word that they like to use, and then you start to use it because it's, whatever, you're hanging around with them. That's what co-ontogenic structural coupling is it's when two human beings start to interact and influence each other in language, like we speak and we listen, right?
Sure.
So applying that to innovation is, for me, I've always, like I said earlier, I've always been like a consistent competitive learner. Part of that is just to basically go out and just look. Like, it's not really that, I'm not saying it's harder or not hard, but I'm always after new information and new knowledge. As I'm reading, I think you're on our Saturday E-Blast. All I do is I'm sharing stuff. I'm always looking for what is that new thing. And maybe sometimes it's good, maybe it fits, but it's in fact, my team will joke, if you ever talk to them about this, to me, in many ways, a lot of the things that we do is an experiment. In fact, my terminology for it in the company is a grand experiment. Like, this whole thing is a grand experiment. Not that we want to have experiments that fail. We work to have experiments that actually work and make us money, right? But at the same time, it's like an openness and flexibility to what we're producing, because just as you say, when you keep in your silo, and we've always done it this way, and that's the way I know how to do it, eventually the market's going to drift away from you. And then your thing that you do and so well will stop working, right? And if you think about it, in the old days, when you had big manufacturing to make widgets, you would build these big factories and you had a machine that did one thing. It processed cotton, or wound string or whatever, right? Like, made widgets. Well, that machine could never be used for something else. You couldn't take that machine and put it in a different building and go, oh, I'm now going to make cars with it or whatever, right? In today's environment, we have computers and the internet, right? And when you approach it from the standpoint of this flexibility, this openness, that the computer and the internet is a tool for learning, for knowledge acquisition, for coordination, cooperation with other people. And although I talked about people speaking to each other, the way we do it now is on our phone, and our computers, we're speaking to people, we're still languaging, right? And so I say all that, that's a lot to digest, but the reality is innovation, to me, at least the way I think of it, is nothing more than keeping an open mind and be able to notice, observe, assess, and then design your actions to take account for the new knowledge. Like one of the things I'll just share and I'll finish here. One of my least favorite parts about the development business, John, is construction. I mean, and we're deep in it. We, before we came on the show, we're talking about construction. We know it really well. And it's the biggest pain in the ass part of the whole business other than politics, right? And so I've been doing an investigation. The technology is not ready yet, but I am really, deeply interested in the idea of 3D printed houses. And yes, there's modular, and yes, there's panelized, and I think there's a story for that. But the idea that we could go 3D print a house, or at least the structure of the house, and then we fill it with the stuff that we fill it in finishes, to me, it's not ready yet. It's not ready for prime time to do the kind of stuff that we do. And people are 3D printing houses and doing it in a production model. And eventually we'll apply it to ours. But I think that's the future of construction. And particularly if you think about California and what a pain in the ass it is to build buildings in California, we need this, in a big way. So I'll just share that as an example.
Yeah. So, I'm going to touch on that a little bit, and then we'll talk about one of your recent examples. Okay. So one of the things, man, I've learned, over the years, which is why I'm a really big proponent of, you have to continuously put yourself in positions where you're forced to evolve, right? Or forced to think about things a little bit differently. But oftentimes your greatest innovations, they come under pressure, right? And so one of the great things about construction is you have a lot of different pressure triggers, right? You got a timing trigger. Well, first you have a debt trigger, which can be a timing trigger. You have an equity trigger, which can be a timing trigger, right? And a performance trigger. So you have all of these things that help make you better if you want to accept it that way. I recently read, not a book, but I saw a series by Doc Rivers. Okay. Doc Rivers, the NBA basketball coach, right? Mm-hmm. And I love biographies, man. But one of the things this guy said, which I completely love and I agree with and I embrace, is pressure is a privilege. Pressure is a privilege, man. Okay, because it helps us get better. It helps us innovate, but it's a very difficult position to stand behind, right? Yeah. Because the reality is it's painful and it's uncomfortable in many cases, one or the other, sometimes both. But to your point, my guess is a lot of these innovations have come from pressure, whether it be the pressure of needing to find different ways to compete, hence this product, right? You're looking at the markets a little bit differently. But then we also have all these other triggers inside of this, right? Which, if we look at this stuff as an opportunity instead of, right, as something that's debilitating, I think, man, that's where the massive...
Instead of a fatal problem, right?
It is, but that's where the growth happens. And so for that, man, I think
that's why I use the example of the grand experiment, because I think that fits with what you're saying. If when you're presented with the pressure or the problem, there's several ways that people react. Some people lock up. Some people run the other way. Some people, sit there and try to figure it out. And to me, that's the crux of and you're right. And I would even say beyond construction, the entire development cycle is all these pressure points: political pressure, financial pressure, construction pressure, the market. Right? We're leasing up Fullerton, and we were delivering in September and October of 2020. I couldn't think of a worse time other than 2008, 2009 to be delivering to market family, not because we saw the market imploding, but we were not sure. Right. Sure. So anyways, where I go with this, you're absolutely right. Pressure is, what is it they say, mother of innovation, right? Innovation, whatever the saying is, I'm blanking on it right now.
So man, let's talk about your recent pressure cooker, the 15 unit development. Now, is that finished? Is that product coming to market, or where are you in the cycle?
Yeah, so this is the Montebello project. So we actually are finished with the buildings. We're working on connecting the Edison, the electrical utilities, And then we got record, some paperwork, some final, permit paperwork with the city. So I think we'll be ready with that, complete that this month. And then we'll go into lease up basically next month. That's, our leasing team. Eric Christopher is our head of property management. So we had a call this morning prepping and go, hey, we're going to be ready in January, TCO. So, it's interesting. The pandemic actually accelerated that project. Interestingly, it didn't save us any costs. In a recessionary environment, a lot of projects stop or unwind, right? Because, people don't want to move forward with them or they're concerned. And so they stop. And what interestingly that did is that dumped a boatload of labor into the marketplace that they were looking for work. And so in like March and April and May, we basically doubled and tripled some of our crew loads for our subcontractors where, a week before, 2 weeks before, our framers couldn't find enough guys. And all of a sudden, shutdowns came and he's getting calls every day, multiple calls a day. Hey dude, you got work? Hey dude, you got work? And he was coming to me and he's like, look, I can bring more guys on. We got to accelerate the cash flow. I go, dude, do it. Right. This has always been a constraint for the last several years in California. We ended up finishing that project probably about 30% early related to time. The budget didn't change much. We're actually, decently under budget on it, but what should have been a 12-month process ended up being 9 months. Did you
cut into your contingency or did the time make up the additional cost of labor?
We were fine on budget. The acceleration didn't change our budget. It just moved the payment timing forward, right? So tripling the crew load didn't make it more expensive. If I'm understanding your question correctly,
yeah.
What it did is it just necessitated that we spend the money earlier. Now that does incur the interest cost early. But we're pretty conservative in our underwriting and reserves for interest reserves, and our budgets are pretty healthy anyways. But what I will share with you, what we did have some timing issues on, part of the reason that we're connecting Edison now is because some of the bureaucratic agencies the utilities, like the gas company and Edison became more slow. So although we accelerated on construction, other parts of the business slowed down. Now we were able to break that loose. So I think we're going to be fine and we will be fine on the deal. In fact, I've already got 2 units pre-leased at, close to $3,800 a month, which is, several $100s a month above our pro forma.
And then how many lessees or how many applicants in that lease or how many?
Oh, of the ones we pre-leased?
Yes.
How many? So both of them are families.
How many folks on the lease?
Yeah, these are families of 6, mom and dad and kids and grandma. That's typically, in fact, both the families that are going to move in as soon as we're ready. In fact, one of them is foreman on one of our subcontractor crews. Hispanic family, worked on the site. He's like, dude, I love these units, man. I want to move my family in here. So he's going to be one of our first leases that are signed. That's the first time that's ever happened to me, by the way.
Nice, man. Well, yeah. Buddy, I really appreciate you being on, man. This has been another great conversation, some good insight. I love the fact that this time we talked about some things that are a little bit different, but I always appreciate talking to you, man, because, the pressure cooker of development forces innovation, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not constantly finding ways, I think, to challenge your traditional thought process, you stay stuck for a very long time, and you just don't evolve. And I think the greatest opportunity in business, which is why I love business, things are constantly changing. And if you can look at things a little bit differently than most people, I think that in and of itself is an advantage, right? So for that, man, I want to thank you. You're always a great guest, and I look forward to your continued success. Look forward to doing some work together. How do people get into, what is the best way for people to find you, Scott?
Yeah, so I would encourage people to go to our website. It's urbanpacific.com and go look at a couple things when you're there. In fact, we just released for public view our investments page. So people can go look at the projects that we're actively raising capital on. So that just came out. And then go to our investor education section. And then, John, what I'll offer for any of your listeners, if they want to email me at Choppin, CHOPPIN @urbanpacific.com. and just, tell me in the email that you heard us on John's show. We'll send you our ebook, which is How to Survive and Thrive in a Recession, which I think is a good subject matter given the times that we're in right now.
Nice, man. I appreciate that. Well, but what is the question that you have for me that you think can add some value to our audience?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I would say, what one of the things I'm always interested in is how people make the transition from like corporate world to being an entrepreneur. That's always an interesting question for me. So the question is, how did you decide to make the leap, or what was the trigger for you to prompt you to like work for yourself? That's
the easiest answer, man, or question I've ever been asked. So it goes like this. Okay. I got fired. My wife was 9 months pregnant, 8 months pregnant with our second daughter. And we just moved into a house in Carlsbad. That's it. A lot of motivation. Yeah.
So the pressure, there's an example of pressure.
Exactly. But actually here's what really happened though. Okay. That did happen. But the reality though, man, is I was ready to leave and I knew I wasn't going back. Right. Mm-hmm. That just accelerated the process. And I'm really grateful for that happening. In fact, when I see the president of that bank, I'm going to thank him. And I mean this sincerely.
Meaning the place where you worked before.
Yeah, because if that did not happen, I wouldn't be able to create the things that I have, right?
Yeah.
But I do remember coming home or going home to my wife, and I was actually really excited. I was relieved, truthfully. Okay, I was relieved, man, because I knew I was never going back, and I knew that, my path was forward, right?
Yeah.
So when I came home, I was nervously excited, and because I told my wife, I opened the door, and she knows when I have something on my mind. She goes, "Hey, what's going on?" I go, "Hey, I think I said, I have some really good news." Mm-hmm. Right? I said, "Hey, I just got fired from my job."
Good news! I got fired. What?
Yeah. No. And so she was 8 months pregnant, man. 8 months pregnant. Okay, just getting ready to have our second daughter.
Yeah.
No. Let's see, our second. No, man, that was our third daughter.
Yeah.
Right. So my two girls, this is our third daughter because she's 14 now. Yeah, that's about right. And, I love my wife for a lot of reasons. Okay. But what I will never forget is in that moment, she got a little bit quiet, which I can understand. And she looked at me and she said, "Hey, look, now you can go out and do what you were designed to do." And I never forgot that, man.
Well, she knew that of you, right? She knew you and knew that was.
Well,
I knew as much as you did, I would bet, that you were ready to do that.
She 100% she did.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, this was in 2008. I left that part out. But I'm very grateful for the opportunity, right? And I'm very grateful that that happened. And so for that, I just am very appreciative of that. Well, hey man, I really appreciate you. I want to wish you continued success, bud. I'm going to reach out to you, after this, and we'll connect. And again, I wish you continued success, and I'll talk to you soon, bud.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, man. Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.